Good morning and welcome to Rising. Happy Monday and thanks for tuning in. We've got a great show for you today. I'm joined by my friend Kevin Walling. And we used to do Fox News together sometimes. Back in the day, the party panel on the Kennedy show.
Reunited and it feels so good.
Great. All right, we've got a lot of exciting things to talk about today. We're going to be zeroing in on politics, and some more politics. There was an earthquake of a poll whose aftershocks are still being talked about. We will get to that in a minute. Of course, much of America is wondering about tomorrow's debate. It's conventional wisdom that the debates don't really matter very much. Of course, we all remember what happened in June when a bad debate performance exposed Joe Biden and forced him from the race, ultimately. We're also going to be looking at what's happening in Aurora, Colorado. Some say Venezuelan gangs have taken over an apartment complex. We'll get to the truth of that matter. So we'll turn now to our top political story. It's the eve of the first presidential debate, and a New York Times Siena poll shows former President Donald Trump has a very narrow lead over Vice President Harris. The poll has Trump leading Harris 48 to 47%. Also found 32% of voters said Trump was too conservative, while 47% said Harris was too liberal. Nate Cohn, the Times chief political analyst, said that the result was, quote, surprising and may capture a shift back toward Donald Trump. Cohn also argues that Harris's campaign may have missed an opportunity to clearly define her in the eyes of the public and let Trump do that instead. New Republic senior editor Alex Shepard seemed to agree with Cohn's take, writing, quote, the Harris-Walz media strategy in a nutshell. Avoid the press at all costs, even when asked questions that should be layups. If this sounds familiar, it's because President Biden employed the same strategy. Didn't work out so well for him, may not for Harris either. Pollster Nate Silver, another Nate, my preferred Nate, I should say, also reacted to the New York Times poll, gave some advice for Democrats. Silver wrote, quote, Democratic messaging often suffers from the sheer abundance of potential attack lines on Trump, causing voters to tune out. Whiny progressive media critics don't seem to understand that elevating every minor controversy surrounding Trump only reduces the signal-to-noise ratio and makes them look like the boy who constantly cried wolf.
And CNN's David Axelrod reacted on X, writing, quote, for those who are irritated a month ago when I warned Dems about irrational exuberance, I caution against irrational despair now. Polls vary and fluctuate, but this race has been close since Kamala Harris entered in August. The Electoral College is challenging for Dems, and the final yards will be hard fought, but this is pretty much a toss-up race. But of course, not all polls show Trump with a favorable lead. For example, the 538 has Harris leading Trump by nearly 3 points. That's, of course, that average from 538. So it's anyone's guess where things stand heading into that most important debate tomorrow night on ABC News.
It's certainly very, very close, but I do feel like there's some kind of correction setting in, that the media maybe got over its skis in terms of coordinating Harris as our next president. It's still very close, and she's not, to me, the key factor is that there are not a lot of compelling polling showing her winning Pennsylvania. And she has to win Pennsylvania or she's going to lose the presidency.
I mean, that's a whole ball game, right? So Harris's must win for Pennsylvania. Trump's must win is Georgia. These polls have been all over the place. Interesting to me, Robbie, that we didn't really see that bump coming out of Chicago, that post-convention bump that usually happens, especially when you're introducing a candidate, particularly for the first time, which we've seen with Vice President Harris. She's still an unknown with so many people in this country, and that's something that the New York Times poll picked up.
So how do you feel about her decision to, I mean, it's fair to say she's backpedaling a lot of the stances, excuse me, that she took in 2020, and she's trying to pretend her values haven't changed, whatever, but it's a very clearly different border policy, green energy mandate, fracking, etc. Is that helping her? Is that making voters confused? Is it dimming enthusiasm among progressives? Does that matter? It's difficult to know what to make of it, but it is, I can't think of other recent examples of a candidate so clearly deviating or changing their mind, or flip-flopping is such a dirty word ever since John Kerry. Now, I would argue she's flipping to the more popular positions on all of these issues.
Right. And
so
hopefully winning positions.
It's hard to disparage, but at the same time, maybe people don't really know what she stands for.
I mean, that's clearly evident in some of this polling where people are hungry. I think 40% in that New York Times poll want to see more from the vice president when it comes to those issues. And that's certainly going to be on display in this debate. It's clearly a line of attack from former President Trump with these kind of shifting policy positions. I think she's made the argument that representing the state of California in the Senate is a different position than being on a national ticket, but that's certainly a line of attack that's resonating with some voters.
But how much of a mistake was everything that happened in 2019, 2020 in terms of the effect it had on Democratic candidates that they had to stake out? They felt compelled to stake out these deeply unpopular positions on criminal justice and,
on the migrant situation.
The migrant situation.
And healthcare. Certainly, I mean, that's problematic, right? And that, I mean, you're referencing especially that the optics of them all raising that hand.
Oh.
Remember when it came to the border question? And that was really difficult.
What was the party thinking at the time?
It's really, and again, to see that shift, and that's also, I think, to your point, Robbie, what powered Joe Biden's victory was that the party wasn't really there. You had the loudest elements of the left there, obviously pulling the party in that direction. But Joe Biden in that race ran as a fairly moderate candidate compared to the other folks on that stage and was able to run up the score in South Carolina, and then that was the whole ballgame.
My analysis is that Democratic elites misunderstood the Bernie Sanders effect. When Bernie came in 2016, did unexpectedly to them surprisingly well against Hillary Clinton, and
filled those stadiums, right? All that enthusiasm, to your point.
And their eventual lesson was, okay, we need to be more left, more progressive. But they only wanted to do that on sort of cultural stuff, maybe immigration, maybe green energy stuff, when really the appeal of Sanders was on a kind of harder, more populist, left economic stuff, working class stuff, not the stuff that it appealed to the party elites to go left on. And also part of his success was just the unpopularity of Hillary Clinton.
Yes.
And maybe a different foreign policy. And they took the elements of leftism that would be least palatable to a general election audience and made their candidates run on that.
And to your point, and taking almost a play from the Donald Trump playbook in 2016 as well in terms of that populism. And that the pendulum swinging where you saw so much overlay between a Bernie Sanders supporter and a Donald Trump supporter when Bernie Sanders lost that primary, right? And the crossover appeal of those base supporters. And I think that's also what we're going to see play out in this race, too, is this gender gap that we're seeing in terms of just how much the vice president is running up the score with women and the former president is running up the score with men. I'd be interested to hear what you think about. This could be the largest split that we've seen probably in a generation between those two kind of factors.
That interesting split is emerging. At the same time, some of the racial split, we've had so much racial polarization in recent election cycles, that is actually decreasing a little bit as Republicans, Donald Trump, doing better and better with particularly black males and Latino voters. And it's remarkable, not that he's going to win this demographic, but the Republicans are putting up single-digit numbers in these categories for years, pathetic numbers.
In that New York Times poll, he's at 14% with black Americans right now. Harris is at 78%.
Yeah.
Biden ran up the score at 90-10 in 2020. To your point, I mean, this is a key audience that is drifting somewhat towards the Republicans. And it's not just black Americans, it's also Latinos. I think she's been able to make some inroads back with recapturing some of those folks, especially younger voters as well.
Younger voters seem
But these coalitions we're witnessing in real time, these coalitions kind of shifting where it wasn't just the mantra that who you look like was and your socioeconomic status determined who you're going to vote for, which is kind of interesting.
What do you expect to see from her tomorrow night? Our reporting suggests she was really hoping that they'd be able to interrupt each other so that she could have her I am speaking moment. And Donald Trump said that would be just fine. I'd be happy to interrupt her if they'd let me. And his people said, no, we're going to not do that.
No.
What's she going to talk about?
Well, I'll tell you, I think part of this, too, is some of the elements we saw in Chicago. I was on the ground in Milwaukee and Chicago for the conventions. There was a heavy emphasis on her time as a prosecutor, right, which isn't red meat for the left in terms of her positions on some of that. So I think her movement towards the center, I think, again, to my earlier point, she's got to reintroduce herself to a lot of Americans. 50 million Americans watched that fascinating Biden-Trump debate in July. I think those numbers are going to be even higher in terms of viewership. Of course, folks are back at school, right? We're kind of into that post-Labor Day. Now we're focusing on the election as opposed to where we were in July. But she has a real opportunity to introduce herself to a lot of Americans that are going to be watching. And it'll be interesting, that interplay, certainly. I think one of the more fascinating things are they really haven't spent a lot of time in the same space before, right? We think, she's been vice president.
But I think she said she's never met him in person.
I don't think she's
she
ever.
Said that to Dana
she was at the inauguration in 2016, obviously, as a senator. But I don't think they've been in the same small space, right, ever before. So this will also be interesting, even though, as we know, he wrote checks to support her as Attorney General. Maybe, I don't know if he even ever attended one of those fundraisers for Attorney General, but it's very likely that there's going to be interesting dynamics of them actually meeting, really, for the first time as well before a national audience.
Yeah, well, we will be tuning in. We're going to have some special coverage after the debate, so you're going to want to tune into Rising for that, and we've got a lot more of the show to get to. More Rising coming up next. He's been dubbed the Nostradamus of presidential elections. Historian at American University, Professor Allan Lichtman, has correctly predicted outcomes of presidential contests since 1984, except for the one, Bush versus Gore, in 2000. His formula includes 13 different elements that he calls keys. The candidate has to meet the vast majority. When he joined us in early July, before President Biden exited the race, he predicted Biden would beat Trump.
And of course, with the unprecedented switch of the Democratic nominee, Professor Lichtman has forecasted Harris will top the former president, contrasting with pollster Nate Silver's predictions that we were just talking about earlier, that said that the former president will be the winner. So who will it be? Here to discuss what his keys are is Professor Lichtman. We are delighted to have you join us. And Professor, I'd like to just start it off with, you have Harris taking 8 of those keys, Trump having 3 of those keys, and 2 of those keys are somewhat unclear in terms of the foreign policy element of it. What went into deciding that supermajority for Harris with those keys?
Let me explain. My system ignores the pundits who don't have a scientific basis for their opinions, and the pollsters like Nate Silver, who are so often wrong. When I predicted Trump in 2016, Silver was predicting a win for Hillary Clinton at about 3/4. Then, of course, when she lost, he said, see, I told you there was more than a 20% chance she would lose. So he can never be right. He can never be wrong. He's just a clerk who compiles polls and also has no scientific basis. The keys are a scientific model that tap into how presidential elections really work as votes up or down on the strength and performance of the White House party. And the way it works, if the White House party loses 6 or more keys, they are predicted losers. Otherwise, they are predicted winners. And definitively, Harris has lost 6 of the needed 6 keys to predict her defeat. Party mandate based on U.S. House losses for Democrats in 2022. Incumbency because the sitting president is no longer running, and incumbent charisma because she's not a Franklin Roosevelt. The only other 2 keys that are in play are the 2 foreign policy, military policy failure and success keys. And I split them. I said Gaza is a failure. It's a humanitarian disaster with no end in sight. We don't have boots on the ground, but we are deeply invested there. And I gave Biden a success for Ukraine. It was Biden and Biden alone that put together the coalition of the West that stopped Putin from conquering Ukraine and threatening our NATO allies. His continued support has let Ukraine survive for more than 2.5 years and even bring the battle to Russia. This will go down as an historic presidential achievement. So that's 4 keys. 2 short of the 6 keys needed to predict Harris's defeat. Even if you didn't believe about the foreign policy success, that's still just 5 keys. The worst case scenario, she's still 1 key short of the 6 keys needed to predict her defeat. That's why my prediction, and of course, I'm a human being, I could be wrong, but I have a track record of 40 years before I think Nate Silver was even born. And I am predicting we're going to have a path-breaking president, the first woman president of the United States, and the first president of African and East Asian descent.
So I suspect if Nate Silver were here, he would say that, your opinion on foreign policy matters, whether you approve or disapprove, he would say, well, that's not scientific at all. What I do, analyzing polls, is the actual science and is somewhat predictive. And you're right that if we say something has a 70% chance of happening and then it doesn't happen, it doesn't mean necessarily that someone who predicted it would have a 70% chance of happening was wrong, because if you flip a coin 10 times and 7 of them are heads and 3 are tails, that's in the expected result. And particularly in this election, where it seems like it's basically a 50-50 and it could go either way, what is the confidence really coming from fundamental science, which has it, Nate Silver would say, at pretty close, pretty dead even?
Polls are not predictors. That's where Nate Silver goes totally wrong. Polls are snapshots. And if you look at his predictions, they're constantly changing depending upon the next poll. They're totally unstable. They have no basis. Plus, Nate Silver doesn't tell you that the error margin of polls is vastly greater than what he would tell you is the plus and minus 3%. That's pure statistical error. That's the error you would get if you had a huge jar of green and red balls and you pulled out a sample and estimated the percentage of green and red balls in the jar. But human beings are not green and red balls. Most people don't respond to pollsters. They may lie. They may not have focused yet. And most critically, no one's voted yet. So they have to guess at who the likely voters are, and every pollster has a different guess. And these non-statistical errors are not random. They are unidirectional. They're why Nate Silver was so wrong about 2016. And like generals fighting the next war, using the last war, they've tried to correct. And the result is they're now underestimating Democratic voting strength, as demonstrated by the 2022 elections, when Nate Silver's red wave never emerged. And also the off-year elections of 2023 and the special elections of 2024. In that marquee race, New York congressional seat that was once held by the disgraced George Santos, the poll on the eve of the election had the Democrat up by 1 point. He won by 8 points, outperforming the polls by 7 points. So don't deceive yourself to thinking that a clerk like Nate Silver, who just compiles polls, is doing anything scientific. Even his probabilities are made up. They're fabricated. They're not real probabilities, which are based on the law of large numbers. You'd have to have many, many, many elections.
So let me ask you this. Let me ask you this. So you think, and you had predicted, that's what we read, that you had predicted Biden was going to beat Trump. You think the polls showing that Biden was going to lose?
Stop.
Okay.
Stop.
Okay.
All right. Stop. You've misrepresented me, and that really makes me angry. What I said was I did not have a final call, and I haven't made it until a few days ago. Months ago, I said a lot would have to go wrong for Biden to lose. I said it can happen. I've made no final prediction, but a lot would have to go wrong. So don't put words in my mouth.
So I'm
perfectly capable of expressing myself.
Yeah, right. So what I was going to ask, do you think the polls that showed Biden losing massively to Donald Trump in, let's say, the last month or two of his campaign before he did drop out, do you think those were accurate polls?
We have no idea whether they're accurate polls or not, because Biden is not running anymore. So that's sheer nonsense. That's sheer speculation. That's not science. That's science fiction.
Well, and Professor Lichtman, credit where credit is due, you were one of the few people that got 2016 right and got some grief for that prediction heading into to that election. So I certainly give you credit on that front. I wonder if you could talk about the key specifically around third party. So did that key flip when RFK stepped back from that race, or I know you had that threshold probably about 10% nationally, which he had months ago, but certainly not, in the lead up to him making the decision to drop out.
Yeah. Before I answer that, I need to clean up this notion that my analyses of foreign policy successes and failures are subjective. None of my keys are subjective. Some are judgmental, but they are very specifically and carefully defined if you read my book, Predicting the Next President. And I've answered these questions developmentally since 1860, all the way to the present. RFK Jr. was fizzling even before he suspended his campaign in recognition of the fact that he was falling apart and going nowhere. I certainly would have called the key in favor of the Democrats even before he pulled out, because he was down in the low single to mid single digits. So, and his pulling out definitively turned the key true.
So what could, if you predict that Harris is ultimately going to win, what could Donald Trump do in the next several weeks could he reverse any of those keys?
Here's the big message of the keys. Even if the pollsters were accurate, they don't tell you anything about how elections work. They're just looking at, these numbers. The keys tell you how elections really work, that it's governing, not campaigning, that counts. No one has ever been able to successfully have a long-term track record in predicting elections by looking at the campaign. Based upon the campaign, Hillary Clinton should have won in a landslide. She won all the debates. She raised more money. She had more ads. She was more experienced. She had a better ground game. And she still lost. Same thing could be said about John Kerry in 2004. So based on my system, there really isn't anything that Donald Trump could do with respect to the campaign to change the verdict of the keys, which are based on the big picture of governing.
Professor Lichtman, also, too, one of the keys is obviously avoiding a serious primary. How important do you credit the vice president kind of coalescing the party in rapid form to not only obviously seal the nomination deal, but avoid any kind of serious primary challenge as one of these keys?
It's a great question. I was very critical of the Democrats. Number one, for trashing their incumbent president right out in public. That was not necessary. And number two, it looked like they were both going to create an open seat and have a big party brawl, losing two of my keys, incumbency and contest. No White House party since 1900 has ever won when there's an open seat and a contest. But somehow, I'm not saying they listened to me, but at least they got a spine and a brain and united behind Harris and secured what looked like a lost contest key. And that's critical. As you see, she's one or two keys short of the 6 keys needed to predict her defeat. So had they lost the contest key, that might have made a difference. Plus, a big party brawl could have had a negative effect on other keys as well, like social unrest or even third party.
Professor Lichtman, thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate it.
Thank you, Professor.
My pleasure.
Go
Take care.
Eagles. GOP royals Liz and Dick Cheney have endorsed Vice President Kamala Harris for president. Let that sink in. The man who many said really led the nation during the Bush era said he would pull the lever for a Democrat. Former Vice President Dick Cheney said that, quote, "In our nation's 248-year history, there has never been an individual who is a greater threat to our republic than Donald Trump. He tried to steal the last election using lies and violence to keep himself in power after the voters had rejected him. He can never be trusted with power again." Former Wyoming Representative Liz Cheney, his daughter, who took a stand against President Trump after January 6, also announced her choice for president late last week. Here she was speaking at Duke University on Wednesday.
Not only is what I've just said about the danger that Trump poses something that should prevent people from voting for him, but I don't believe that we have the luxury of writing in candidates' names, particularly in swing states. And as a conservative, as someone who believes in and cares about the Constitution, I have thought deeply about this. And because of the danger that Donald Trump poses, not only am I not voting for Donald Trump, but I will be voting for Kamala Harris in this election.
And here she was on ABC News just yesterday.
Donald Trump presents a challenge and a threat fundamentally to the republic. We see it on a daily basis. Somebody who was willing to use violence in order to attempt to seize power, to stay in power. Someone who represents unrecoverable catastrophe, frankly. I think it's important for people to recognize he's not a conservative.
The youngest son of the late Senator John McCain, Jimmy McCain, also came out with support for the vice president after Trump's appearance at Arlington National Cemetery. McCain called Trump's visit to the burial site a violation. He said, quote, that I feel that Kamala Harris and Tim Walz embody a group of people that will help make this country better, that will take us forward. It was only weeks ago that Jim McCain changed his voter registration to Democrat, according to CNN.
But at the end of the day, does it really matter that these lifelong conservatives are turning their backs on Trump? Are they affiliated with a GOP that no longer exists? Joining us now to weigh in on all of this, what we can expect from Tuesday night's debate between Harris and Trump is senior spokesperson at the Democratic National Committee, Hannah Moldavan. Hannah, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
You know, it's interesting to see the Democrats are welcoming, as far as I can tell, the endorsement, the support of the Cheney family, some members of the McCain family. You know, I can remember, I'm somewhat old. I remember the demonization of particularly the Cheneys coming from Democrats. So many, you know, Dick Cheney was like Darth Vader, was the big villain of the aughts from the Democratic standpoint. What does it say that now they're safely welcomed in the fold?
Well, thank you for having me. You know, before I was at the Democratic National Committee, I worked with Congresswoman Liz Cheney on the January 6th committee. So I was able to see up close, working directly with her every day, who this woman is and how much she cares about our country. And so the fact that you're seeing her, and you mentioned Dick Cheney, who was not always welcomed in the Democratic Party and was not a favorite among Democrats, standing up for what is right. And they're doing that because of what Donald Trump did in the 2020 election. He tried to overturn the election. If he's elected again, he said he'll be a dictator on day one. And so I think it's important for Democrats to listen to these voices, to welcome them into the party with a broad, diverse coalition. And that's what it's going to take to have us win in November, right? This is going to be a really close race. And we need all of the voices, all different perspectives out there, showing why they are supporting a Harris-Walz ticket.
It's pretty extraordinary to see, you know, I did not have Bernie Sanders and Dick Cheney supporting the same candidate for president on my bingo card even just weeks ago. So it's been incredible to see that change, especially with the Cheney family, as Robbie just mentioned. I wonder, you know, as he said in his intro, you know, are they still, you know, do they still have credit, do you think, Hannah, on the right with some folks? I think, you know, people have reported about this idea, this notion of a permission structure, right? If we see folks like this come out in support of the vice president, kind of giving her cover, do you think that will actually sway some of the folks that are, you know, somewhat in the middle of the Republican Party?
You know, Kevin, I think that's a great question. We know that Dick Cheney, Liz Cheney, they're conservatives. They disagree on a lot of issues that Kamala Harris might say one thing on and they say the other. But it's not just the Cheneys. It's not just John McCain's son who came out against this. Today, we saw that 10 former senior military officials came out and endorsed Kamala Harris. This is a bipartisan group of people because they know that Donald Trump would be a danger to our democracy if elected again. I'll also say that we had one of the best, I think the best, grassroots fundraising numbers in the month of August. We had 3 million donors, over half of those new. Over a fifth of those, or almost a fifth of those, were Republicans. This is going to be a close race. In 2020, it was 40,000 votes across the battleground states. That was the difference between Joe Biden winning and him losing. We know we have to reach out to everybody, even if it's just your neighbor who might be a Republican, but might also not be excited about another Donald Trump presidency. And we're bringing them into the fold. And folks like Dick Cheney, Liz Cheney, these national security advisors, Republicans that know Donald Trump best, them speaking out is important because it brings everybody else in and lets them know it's okay to be a part of this ticket that's full of joy, that's full of hope. We're not going back. And I think a lot of these Republicans might not want to go back to a Donald Trump presidency as well.
You know, I think the attitude from a lot of people on the right has been good riddance, frankly, has been a desire to part with the policies that the Cheneys and maybe to some extent the McCains represented in terms of the Republican Party being very hawkish, very interventionist on foreign policy. Donald Trump has spoken against that many times. You can, debate or argue whether his tenure as president lived up to the kind of rhetoric surrounding that. But I think the view of many on the right is that, these people, the military advisors, national security people who got a lot of important foreign policy questions wrong over the years, good riddance. We don't want them on the new party we're building anyway.
I think a Donald Trump presidency, another one, would just be a lot more of what his last one was, but a little more dangerous, right? Which is it's all about himself. His policies don't stand in conservatism or the Constitution, as Liz Cheney said, because they're all centered around helping himself. Even his Extreme Project 2025 agenda would take away and ban abortion nationwide, take away our freedoms, give tax cuts to the wealthy, him and his friends. So whatever Donald Trump stands for and however the Republican Party is shifting, it's clear that the one he is in charge of right now is one that benefits him and himself. And I think that's in stark contrast to a Democratic Party ticket led by Vice President Harris and Governor Walz. They're putting forward policies that are strong internationally, right? I mentioned these former senior military officials that say that she's actually a stronger leader than Donald Trump. We want her at the helm. We're not just denouncing the craziness that he brings, but we're endorsing a Democratic ticket because we believe in what she would be able to bring to the office.
That's an interesting point, Hannah, that so many of these folks aren't just saying we're out there against Donald Trump and his policies and a return to those 4 years, but we're actually endorsing the vice president in terms of her character and stances on a lot of these international issues, especially Ukraine, that we've seen play out. A number of these issues will certainly be on display during tomorrow night's debate. All eyes are going to be on that. 50 million viewers turned into the first debate. This is the first time we've seen a matchup between the vice president and the former president. I wonder, Hannah, if you could take us in the room a little bit to talk about, what the vice president is thinking, debate prep heading into this all-important debate tomorrow night.
It's going to be a really great opportunity for the American people to see Kamala Harris on the debate stage against Donald Trump. And I think we should be honest with ourselves. This is a man who, I believe this is his 7th presidential debate. He's done this before. He's good at this. He won the debate back in June. His team made sure that the mics would be muted so he would be more disciplined. And the vice president said earlier in an interview that she's expecting him to lie. We know that this man lies a lot on the debate stage. And so it's going to be a tough matchup. What I'll say, though, is Vice President Harris is preparing. She knows that her policies are more popular than his. She knows that it's important to talk about her plans to lower costs for working families, to make sure that the cost of groceries, the cost of housing goes down, and that she wants to talk about protecting our freedoms, unlike Donald Trump, who wants to rip them away with his extreme agenda. So it's going to be really tough out there, Kevin. This is a man who knows what he's doing, but Vice President Kamala Harris has always been a fighter for the people, and I think we'll see that on the debate stage tomorrow night.
Hannah, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it.
Thanks, Hannah.
Is a Venezuelan gang taking over Aurora, Colorado? That depends on who you ask. The New York Post is reporting a Colorado landlord has just agreed to sell an apartment complex that was taken over by a violent Venezuelan migrant gang called Tren de Aragua. A Denver law firm hired to investigate the alleged takeover recently issued a report to city leaders. The report found Tren de Aragua gang members had taken over the Whispering Pines apartments in 2023 and have engaged in violent assaults, murder threats, extortion, and child prostitution. Plus, a video last week went viral showing armed men knocking on an apartment door in one of the buildings. In June, attorneys for the landlord sent letters requesting help from local officials and police, claiming Tren de Aragua had, quote, forcibly taken control of the complex. The city deemed the complex a, quote, criminal nuisance and evicted the residents.
But police in the Denver suburb of Aurora deny the Venezuelan gang has taken over this rundown apartment complex. Take a listen to the Aurora police chief, the interim chief rather, Heather Morris.
We've been talking to the residents here and learning from them to find out what exactly is going on, and there's definitely a different picture. I'm not saying that there's not gang members that don't live in this community, But what we're learning out here is that gang members have not taken over this complex. We've really made an effort to the last few days to just really ask the specific questions and the direct questions in terms of the gang activity and who's actually making sure that people aren't paying rent to gang leaders or gang members, that's not happening. And we've discovered here today and yesterday talking to so many residents that that's not the case.
And that was interim Aurora Police Chief Heather Morse. The police department that she runs says that they have established a special task force to address concerns about this gang that are so far linked to people in the city. And of course, this gang has they've arrested 6 of these gang members. City officials in Aurora also insist that the buildings were run down because of neglect by their property manager. Still, this is what former President Trump is saying about this situation. Let's watch the former president.
Take a look at Aurora in Colorado, where Venezuelans are taking over the whole town. They're taking over buildings, the whole town. And the sheriff, who can blame them? I mean, they have AK-47s. You saw it the other day. They're knocking down doors and occupying apartments of people. The people are petrified.
Yeah, so the revisionist history going on here, I think, is not particularly comforting. Like, okay, maybe the gang is not in charge of or in control of the
They're not sending out
building.
rent requests and things like that.
Okay, fine. But as the mayor, I believe this is the mayor, said in a statement.
Mayor Mike Kaufman.
Yes, I certainly believe that there were Venezuelan gang-related problems, as previously reported, that caused the property managers to flee. And he appreciates the work of the police in making multiple arrests relating to Venezuelan gang activity. So it certainly sounds like the Venezuelan gang was operating out of this apartment building, that was a problem, obviously, for the property owner and for the other tenants, and that was the root of the problems. You can debate who's in control in a sort of in that sense.
Who's fielding
but
plumbing requests in the building?
Right, that's not going to put anyone at ease. Oh, they're not in control. They have a presence in the building, and we've had to arrest many of them for crimes.
And I think the mayor used the word infiltrated as the language there to describe the situation.
But so this is being treated as like, crazy right-wing people made up this story, right?
Well, listen, and again, I think this is going to play heavily, right? The optics of that video of that gang that we've seen in the news are certainly troubling images for especially middle America, right? So this is obviously a right political issue. You saw the former president address that in that town hall last week, and we'll see whether that really plays out in tomorrow's debate or on the campaign trail.
I mean, she's vulnerable on this issue, right? For what she said about the border in the past. The border should be decriminalized. I mean, the Democratic Party did her no favors by asking her that and having her, raise her hand or indicate that way. Americans are so frustrated with our immigration problem right now. And, I'm someone who wants certainly more legal immigration. I think immigrants contribute wonderfully to our country. We need people to work in this country, to build things and to contribute. And, we're a nation of immigrants and most of our ancestors are immigrants. And I have absolutely nothing against immigrants. Immigration is very important. But what people don't like is that they're streaming across the border, contributing to unrest and chaos there. The images are undeniable. And then, we do want to have a vetting system. We don't have to let violent criminals or terrorists into our country. We absolutely can prohibit that. If you want to come here and work, not take advantage of welfare, not get free housing, come here and work, great,
go through
all
the
for
process,
it. Go through the process. And we need to make the process easier.
Certainly.
The process is way too difficult.
Very cumbersome.
So people who want to do it the right way wait in line for years, and that's stupid. And Congress needs to fix that right away. But that doesn't mean
we have a real need for some of these, especially in some of these labor sectors.
We do.
For these individuals to come legally to this country to fuel this ongoing economic rise that we're seeing in terms of GDP. We can talk about the margins in terms of where the economy stands. I wonder, though, Robbie, could this actually play to the vice president's advantage with her? She campaigned on taking on transnational gangs, right? So that was foremost in her biography video in Chicago. Can she potentially flip the script maybe on the gang issue, less on the immigration issue? Or is it all just, you think, out of reach when it comes to immigration.
I don't know, maybe she's going to stand up there and say, yeah, I'm a prosecutor. I'm going to prosecute these people now that she's making this heel turn to be a tough on crime person, even though they ran on, again, Democrats really ran away from that issue for so long. People are very concerned about crime in this country. I don't know that the bulk of it or the majority of it or even a disproportionate amount is even necessarily caused by immigrants, but nobody likes the idea of a Venezuelan gang taking over. I mean, that sounds like Breaking Bad or something, right? That's what it made me think of.
They need a van out there,
Yeah, that's no good. And we need police to make arrests, and then we need people to be prosecuted, and where appropriate, deported for criminal activity. Yes, deport them, or in such a fashion that they can't come back to the country. Oh, that sounds like executing them or something, but or in prison, or whatever's supposed to happen. I don't know, but that they don't just come right back in, or that they get released onto the streets. Why do we have people when there are violent crimes being committed in this country, and we find time and time again that they've been released, over and over and
keep
over
crossing
again.
the border, and there's many stories about that, certainly.
Yeah, and I'm all for, I'm all for due process and criminal justice reform, and I think we have too many people in our prisons who are not a violent threat, who are, if it's for drug offenses or you've just aged out, people who commit crimes as teenagers and they've been in there their whole lives and they're no longer a threat to anyone. It's going to be difficult to rehabilitate them. That's a different task, but the demographic of people who commit violent crime is like all males between the ages of 15 and I don't know what it is on the other end.
Yeah.
And making sure we have people engaged in socially borderline dangerous activity dealt with is the whole project of government and of civilized society. And it's not happening. It feels like it's not happening.
Well, again, and I do think there is somewhat of a disconnect. Now, crime statistics, there's always a lag, right? And I don't think the FBI does a very good job on that front in terms of actually tracking in real time where things are. But there is somewhat of a disconnect in terms of the statistics. And I think Democrats often get lost in the statistics. We love to say crime is down 12%, violent crime is down 5% in each of these cities. But if people, to your point, Robbie, fundamentally don't feel safe, right, they're going to vote on those issues. And especially in suburbs, which are going to be key in these 7 battleground states, right? Aurora is a suburb of Denver. Now, really isn't, I think Colorado is likely out of reach for the Republicans this cycle, but it was once a purple state. But it certainly plays in the suburbs of Atlanta. It certainly plays in the suburbs of Philadelphia. It certainly plays in the suburbs of Milwaukee, and we'll see if that translates for Republicans.
I expect that will come up at the debate. More Rising right after this. Brazilians are enraged and taking to the streets, as they should be, at the government's banning of X. Thousands of protesters entered the streets in Sao Paulo, where they rallied to rebuke the country's censorious decision to block the social media platform. Brazilians flocked to Sao Paulo Avenue on Saturday, September 7th, their Independence Day. Ex-President Jair Bolsonaro led the rally, where he delivered blistering remarks against Supreme Court Justice Alexandre de Moraes and his political rival, the President Lula da Silva, saying, quote, "I hope that the federal Senate puts the brakes on Alexandre de Moraes, this dictator who does more harm to Brazil than Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva himself." Lula also held an official parade, but it didn't draw nearly as many Brazilians to it.
For background on this issue, Justice Moraes ordered the shutdown of X after Elon Musk failed to comply with an order to ban certain accounts belonging to journalists and people whose support were spreading misinformation about the election. The overnight ban dealt a blow to Brazilians across the country who rely on X for their livelihoods. For example, as the New York Times reported, Adriane Rodriguez, a music producer, was banking on the platform to circulate news of her first album, only to see it completely disappear from the social media platform after X was shuttered. Brazilians quickly moved to other platforms, of course, including Blue Sky and Meta's Threads, and direct competitors of Musk's X, which are those competitors. Per the Times, Blue Sky's subscribers doubled in just days since Brazil banned X, and Meta's Threads grew by a third. So it's fascinating to see now this play out.
From almost no one using them to slightly more than almost.
I don't think anyone's using them here in the States mostly. It's still obviously Twitter and X, but it is interesting to see that growth in third-party platforms, and we'll see if that sustains.
Sure. yeah, I've tried to use those other places, and I just
It's just
can't-
not as easy, right?
Can't
You
get
don't have
into
the
it.
following and the,
No,
you know.
can't do it. And it attracts, since it's specifically for people who don't like Elon Musk or like right-wing politics, and it's a lot of like people who want it to be COVID mitigation forever.
Yes.
Is what I found, which are not my favorite people in the world. So I will just be staying on X. But you can't if you're in Brazil because of this awful series of decisions by this one man, this judge, who has ordered Elon Musk to take down information that he thinks is wrong on the platform. And Elon Musk refused, and so they made it impossible for the site to operate there. This is a decision that has been criticized. I was glad to see by many mainstream outlets, by the Washington Post, had a great editorial last week saying this clearly goes too far, that even if you think there is harmful misinformation on the platform, this solution of now having it not available to anyone is clearly an overreach. You know, X certainly is a place where wrong information gets posted. That can happen on Threads too. That can happen on Facebook. That can happen on YouTube. But what X has going for it, I would argue, is the community notes feature where people can chime in and say, actually, this is wrong. You see that happen in your feeds all the time. Or you can share, you know, a corrective kind of thing. That to me is the right way to do it. You know, they're trying to decide, the authorities in Brazil, you know, what's right, what's wrong. Well, how, you know, we can't trust the authorities.
By one person.
Right.
By one person, to your point.
You cannot trust that person to always get it right. We learned that with COVID. We learned that with Hunter Biden laptop stuff, that elites, authority figures, fact checkers, the misinformation watchdog people, they can get it wrong. And they should not, in my view, have this power to solely decide what you're allowed to discuss.
What I think lost in this conversation too, and I'm glad that this Times article talked about it, is the fact that, you know, we're on there for news, breaking information, everything like that. But there are a lot of people on there that use it for their music, for example, right? That are using it as a business tool to spread the word about what they're writing, what they're producing, what they're making. And I think that oftentimes gets lost in the shuffle, is that a lot of people's livelihoods, especially in this article, in the New York Times article, are so dependent on this platform to make a livelihood for themselves.
Absolutely. And people in different parts of the world rely on different social media apps for primary modes of communications in places where you don't have as reliable access to cell phones or cellular networks. Sometimes a social media app or a site or something like WhatsApp or Telegram, which had a similarly, in my view, crazy action taken against it by the French authorities. Look, there is this broad crackdown happening really all over the globe, where from as diverse as what's happening in Brazil and South America to China, to Iran, to, very sadly, in my view, the European Union, who Europe, a place where our Enlightenment, free speech ideals
fundamental freedoms
were born. Where we borrowed that from them. And right now the U.S., and we have a lot of problems on this front too, but because we have the First Amendment, we have more protections, and we're more likely to offer robust protections for speech on social media. But elsewhere in the world, these government authorities trying to, you know, right and left, authoritarian right and authoritarian left, trying to stifle the people's ability to consume information. And it used to be because of hate speech and racism, and now it's because of this misinformation sort of thing. It's very dangerous.
I look to you really as an expert in this field on First Amendment freedoms, and you've written and talked about this since you got started in politics.
That's very kind.
I wonder how much of this is wrapped up in dislike of Elon Musk, right? If he wasn't the head of Twitter, or X rather, would this be happening in a lot of these countries that we're seeing? How much of this is wrapped up in him personally, do you think?
I think certainly a great deal, and there's no mistaking it. He is a right-wing conservative
Make no bones
figure.
about it. Yep.
He has endorsed Donald Trump. He is all in the tank for Trump. And I do think sometimes it is, well, he's within his rights. He owns the site. He can do whatever he wants. I think it is maybe not helpful to the cause that he is both the owner of the site and the person setting the rules, and like its main combatant and most active participant on behalf of a right-wing cause.
That he gets kind of joy from in terms of the interplay.
Well, that's why I bought it, because he really liked the site
he enjoys
so much.
the give and take.
Like sometimes he'll put up polls like, you know, should I have Alex Jones come back? Should I ban this person? I'm like, well, I don't know that I want decision by poll. Or sometimes, you know, he'll respond to people saying, Elon, why have I been censored? He'll be like looking into this. Surely asking the CEO to look at is not a long-term content moderation strategy. But on the whole, I appreciate at least his rhetorical commitments. I think the site has improved in some ways. Others, I think it still has a long ways to go, clearly.
And no site is perfect.
No site is perfect. I do like the community notes feature a lot, and that wasn't even his invention. That was pioneered by the team before he came aboard.
Giving context to a lot of
he likes he likes the function, but certainly his embrace of a kind of conservative agenda has brought him under attack. But even people who do try to remain neutral. I mean, Mark Zuckerberg, he's saying I'm not going to be for or against any political candidate. He's put out that statement. He gets it.
After giving boatloads of cash in previous election cycles,
Yes.
realizing that certainly was problematic in terms of how it's perceived of running these platforms.
And that it did him no good, because then Democrats and the administrations he supported came for him with an incredible amount of agitation. I mean, Mark Zuckerberg was blamed for Hillary Clinton's 2016 loss.
By Hillary Clinton.
Clinton.
She cited Facebook as
And by
one
the
of core
media
reasons.
over and over again, which to me was insane. I think her running the worst campaign in modern history. Like, remember to campaign in Michigan and Pennsylvania before you start blaming Mark Zuckerberg.
Just a few key states in terms of that blue wall.
Insane. But he has subsequently decided, and he's mad that they pushed him to do things he regrets doing in terms of the content moderation around the Hunter Biden question and COVID.
Sure. Yeah. But it is fascinating to watch this process play out, and we'll see if it has legs. To your point earlier, in the EU, other countries with an outright ban potentially on the horizon.
Yeah, it makes me very grateful every day that we have the First Amendment. I can't imagine
Amen.
how bad it would be here. And again, not just for right-wing people, but also for progressives, liberals, mainstream people, everybody.
It's the best protection.
Indeed. More Rising right after this. Democratic Senator Bernie Sanders said the quiet part out loud during an interview with NBC's Kristen Welker. Let's watch.
Described Vice President Kamala Harris as a progressive. She has previously supported Medicare for all. Now she does not. She's previously supported a ban on fracking. Now she does not. These, Senator, are ideas that you have campaigned on. Do you think that she is abandoning her progressive ideals?
No, I don't think she's abandoning her ideals. I think she's trying to be pragmatic and doing what she thinks is right in order to win the election. My own view is slightly different. I think that in America today there are a lot of people, rural people, working class people, who no longer believe that the United States Congress and government represents their interests, too dominated by big money interests.
I should note, of course, Bernie Sanders is an independent senator who caucuses with the Democrats, not actually a Democrat. Look, I mean, I always appreciate Bernie Sanders. I don't agree with him on the vast majority of issues. I agree with him every now and then. But he's a pretty frank, plain-spoken person. And yeah, I think what he's saying there is like, look, it goes to what I said earlier in the show. Some of what she was forced to embrace during the progressive rebranding of the party in 2019 and 2020 is not popular, and now she's backing away from it. I think Bernie would say that the kinds of things that he runs on, the left issues he represents, he would argue they are popular. Medicare for all, expanding minimum wage, more economic benefits for working class people. I think some of those things are, I think sometimes there's no connection between whether something's popular and whether it's a good policy idea.
Sure.
I think the way you present ideas can make them more popular and less popular. Right, if you say we're going to increase everyone's health care coverage, make it easier for them, make them pay less, make it more affordable, and we call it Medicare for all, do you want that? Everyone's going to say it sounds great. If you say, and it's going to result in shortages and rationing of care and longer lines, it'll be more like Canada when they come here.
Fairly large deficit as well.
Yeah, do you like that idea? They say no. And so, of course, then the question, well, how do we get people more affordable care, more access to health care coverage? Nobody wants people, car accident, dying in the street because they don't have health care coverage. Nobody wants that. How do we give people more coverage without having some of the shortages and price rationing, or having the price go through the roof because now it's subsidized? All the problems that are characteristic of other systems is a difficult policy question. But I appreciate him saying there that, yeah, she's running away from the really obviously unpopular ideas.
And we see this process often play out, too, when you pivot from a primary to general. Of course, she did not go through that primary. She did
lucky
in
her.
2020, right, to your point earlier in the show in terms of taking some of those positions. But we see this oftentimes when people pivot back to the center. We're seeing a little bit with the former president on the question of abortion, right? Now heading into the general election, 57 days out today, in terms of a lot has been made about his shifting positions on that critical issue. But it's this balancing act, to your point, where she was in favor of a number of these things. And I think we had that transparent answer from Bernie Sanders. She's running to win, right? And these are the issues and the stances that he believes she needs to take in order to be successful.
I mean, I absolutely believe that she cares more about winning than she does about any specific policy, right? She's not someone. Bernie Sanders clearly does care about a certain set of policies. He thinks they would be better for the country. I don't think they would be better for the country, but he absolutely does.
And he didn't win, right? So he's like an ideologue that,
yeah.
And was fun, I think, because I think at the end of the day would tell you I didn't lose any sleep or any element of my character positioning myself. I'm still the same Bernie Sanders that was mayor of Burlington.
She would reinvent herself any number of times in order to be president. And she is certainly doing that. And you're right that Donald Trump has also changed over the course of his trajectory as a public figure, he's obviously changed dramatically. He was formerly a Democrat.
Formerly a Democrat, super pro-choice.
Clearly was pro-choice, then had to get the endorsement from evangelical people, and is now again emphasizing, he says he is pro-life, but is emphasizing that there will be no national abortion policy. And I feel like the media treats this like it's a flip-flop, even though I don't think it is. He's said that, you can think, as I do, for instance, that Roe v. Wade was not a correctly decided Supreme Court decision, and
from
a legal standpoint, and that abortion should be left up to the states.
Ruth Bader Ginsburg said similar things as the true progressive on the court, 100%. That there were legal issues 100%. With the sounding in that case.
And his position is, and I agree with him, that there should be there's not consensus on this issue, and it's not the job of the federal government to decide it. So there should certainly not be a federal national abortion policy. The states will decide, and the states so far are deciding, even red states are saying no to very, very strict abortion limits, maybe in the 10 to 15 weeks category, are acceptable to some people, but that's pretty moderate. Even by the standpoint of the rest of the world, that's pretty moderate. That's what European countries have.
And you saw that with Lindsey Graham trying to get his party on that kind of focus around 15 to 20 weeks.
Although he brought up the idea of the national, which
he brought up the issue.
Why did he say that?
Error quite a bit.
Trump has not said that, and Trump has consistently denied that they would do anything about it at the national level. But the media keeps bringing it up, because they're obsessed with this as a potential flip-flop. Meanwhile, Kamala Harris has been grilled, I would say, very lightly, when she deigns to do an interview at all, that interview she did with Dana Bash, where Dana did ask her, well, you said this and now you say this. And Kamala said that was not a changing of her values, but it's just different now, and there was no follow-up.
Yeah, I think, I think we give a lot of grief, and it goes back to John Kerry, right? The flip-flopping, the sailboat ad back and forth and stuff like that.
Yeah.
I actually like a politician that learns more, right? Mm-hmm. Things change over time, right? And I think that, we give so many people grief for changing their position on issues. Now, it shouldn't be a radical departure in terms of what people have previously said, because then it speaks to your issue of not really having a core to begin with. But I like when a candidate, shifts somewhat based on where the society is, where the people are, and where that issue is over time. We'll see. Obviously, this is going to play out with David Muir tomorrow in this debate. All eyes are going to be on that. You can rest assured he's going to be asking about some of these policy changes, certainly.
I suppose I want them to flip-flop when I like their new position better.
Me too.
And when I don't agree with the position. Yeah. So there's me saying the quiet part out loud. I didn't like her position on fracking before. I like it better now. I didn't like her position on an electric vehicle mandate. I like it better now. But then it speaks to how will she actually govern, and will there be continuity, because the federal government ends up being staffed with, in my view, deeply progressive people, people who are more committed to, for instance, antitrust is very much happening under the Biden administration, and there's some concern or question of what Kamala Harris is going to do on that. I think she's been trying to reassure some people in the business community that she's going to rein in Lena Khan of the FTC, who's waging this one-woman scorched earth war on every major
certainly important for
tech company,
corporate issues and tech companies especially.
Yes, and I would argue that she's gone much further, much more aggressive on a lot of those things than I'm comfortable with. Bringing government action against companies that people like, and she's saying she's doing this on behalf of the consumer. I'm like, well, does the consumer want Amazon and Google to be screwed up or not function for them properly? Maybe they do. I don't know.
Shipping. Yeah.
Maybe they do, but I don't know. It doesn't seem like it to me. But whether she's going to, reassure those people at the same time, like I saw, Mark Cuban had a lot to say about Kamala Harris,
who's been her
recently.
biggest endorser and surrogate out there.
Big supporter of her, but again saying that the fears the business community has about what she'd do in terms of taxing, unrealized gains, that kind of stuff.
Yeah,
that's never going to happen. You don't have to worry about it. It's not going to happen. It's about like not believing what her surrogates say because we don't hear from her enough.
Yeah.
So we have to try to guess based on what the people around her are saying.
And to some degree, that's been working for her politically, at least in the short term, in terms of her taking over the mantle from Joe Biden. But again, she will certainly be on display tomorrow in this debate.
Yeah. Meanwhile, people on the right say, who are business people who don't want the tariffs that Donald Trump has promised to do, although Biden's done plenty of tariffing himself.
And continued some of the policies of, obviously.
Yes, they're saying, he's not actually going to do those, so don't worry about it, because those tariffs would be ruinous, would wreck a lot of big businesses. I think would be very bad for the economy. I truly don't want them to become policy under Democrats or Republicans.
It's a race to the bottom.
But they're saying that he wouldn't actually do them, so it's like we have to... Are we deluding ourselves into thinking these politicians won't do bad policies that they're promising to do?
And a 50-50 Senate, you can guarantee likely we're not getting any of that.
Maybe we're just not getting
policies.
Maybe we're just not getting anything. And then why does it even matter? It matters just to us, the pundits. More Rising right after this. Morning Joe is angry with their mainstream media colleagues for not being hard enough on Donald Trump. Really? Let's watch.
You look at what Donald Trump is doing on the eve of the presidential debate, talking about violence, talking about bloody deportations. We're going to have deportations, and they're going to be bloody. Talking about the January 6th rioters as patriots, and saying that he's going to get them out of jail. Mocking, once again, Nancy Pelosi's husband getting his head smashed in by somebody that was spouting Trump talking points. We could go down the list, but he is doing that right now. And this whole idea that we see in the media, the left wing says this, the right wing says that. The false moral equivalencies, I think, are really laid low. But this is some left wing, right wing thing. When you see Dick Cheney, Liz Cheney, and all of these generals that work for Donald Trump saying the man is unfit to be president.
I am a little discouraged at how the mainstream media is covering the race like you are, Joe. Listen, what he said over the weekend deserves a headline this morning. It deserves a headline. It would get a headline if Kamala Harris said stuff like that.
This is hilarious to me. And this happens a lot of criticisms of the mainstream media coming from mainstream progressive commentators that, this would get a headline if it was Kamala Harris. You think this stuff is not getting headlines? Have you opened the pages of the New York Times or logged on to Politico or the Atlantic or any other major media outlet? I'm sure there are headlines at MSNBC and just like news headlines. And in fact, there are. If you look, all of the, according to them, crazy things Trump is saying or promising to do are in fact being covered by the mainstream media. So their real frustration is actually not with their colleagues who are covering these things. Their frustration is with the American people for not caring enough or not finding it automatically disqualifying for Trump, or not all of them. Obviously, there's half of America that doesn't support and won't vote for Donald Trump, but there's the other half who will or who might. It's going to be a close election. What frustrates Joe Scarborough-type people is that despite Trump's erratic statements and things that, a lot of things I don't think are good, nobody thinks January 6th was good or what he said about it is good, hadn't even helped him. Even if you're pro-Trump, you can't argue that this was good from the standpoint of re-electing Donald Trump. Despite all that, there's enough people in this country who like his policies or dislike the policies of Democrats enough that it's still worth voting for him.
And
that's what frustrates
generally tune out everything that he's saying,
Yeah.
aren't on Truth Social necessarily, seeing his latest and greatest things. I think there is that frustration among the liberal commentators, right? Senator Claire McCaskill and others, Joe Scarborough, that this is already baked in with the American people, right? They know that this is what the former president is going to do and traffic all this. In their estimation, absolutely should his latest and greatest attacks on XYZ be leading news coverage, certainly. And to your point, it is on a lot of those
It
outlets.
is.
But the American people, I think, are just, they know he's a known quantity, right? In that that New York Times polling that we were talking about earlier, I think it's just 7% want to know more about Donald Trump, right? He is, 30% want to know more about the vice president in the positions. We know what we're getting with Donald Trump, right or wrong. I happen to be on the more, Democratic side of the aisle, but, he is a known quantity, and I think that frustration is palpable among those media elites, right? And I'll call them that this isn't having more of an effect with the American people. And in fact, the DNC, the Harris campaign, just released a new ad, it's called The Best People, featuring remarks from former Secretary Esper and John Bolton and others. And we'll see if that even resonates with a lot of people. We talked about it with Hannah in terms of these GOP endorsements, and if that even has an effect going forward.
Yeah, I think it will have very little effect. Look, it doesn't help. Certainly, former Republicans turning on the party is not a good thing from a PR standpoint. Now, I would argue that the Cheneys in particular represent a very different vision of the Republican Party, one that lost out, one that Democrats and mainstream media commentators were extremely, exhaustively critical of, often for good reason. I think the Republican Party's foreign policy under those political figures was a really catastrophically bad idea in terms of the party and also in terms of global stability
Humanity
and security
writ large. Yep.
And it was all really bad. And pivoting away from that is a good thing. And it's it's funny to see. We now have Dick Cheney supporting Kamala Harris and Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is supporting Donald Trump. You have to update those.
This is a strange bedfellows election,
but
certainly heading out 57 days from now.
I mean, it's to your point that people change what they think over time, or people emphasize.
And coalitions change too, right?
Coalitions change.
And we talked about some of those shifting demographics.
Right. RFK Jr., for instance, was emphasizing some skepticism of vaccines forever, for years and years and years, and that used to be totally accepted on the Democratic side.
Alongside his strong support for the environment, right? And conservation. He held those two views and was particularly outspoken about those issues. One resonates with Democrats, one resonates with folks that, are a little bit more populist and a little bit, I don't think are strong politically, ideologically.
There's been tremendous polarization around educational attainment and sort of just trust in society. If you're someone now who trusts the expert or the elite consensus, you are extraordinarily more likely than you were to be a Democrat, to be a progressive. If you're someone who is skeptical and contrarian and thinks the elites are getting everything wrong and they don't have working people's interests in mind, you are increasingly likely to be a Republican. That wasn't always the case. It used to be different institutions where people were skeptical of, like Republicans didn't trust the school system or the media, but they trusted the military and they trusted scientists.
And the FBI. And
FBI. And now they think the FBI is out to get them.
Exactly.
And on the other hand, Democrats, left-wing activists, this is still true to some degree, but, left-wing activists embrace extinction movement type stuff, right? Limit how many kids you have. And there's still that is still prevalent on the left. But broadly speaking, Democrats have gotten on board with whatever elites are saying on those issues, which to my mind is sometimes right and sometimes wrong. I think it's healthy to have a level of skepticism and contrarianism for what the elites and the experts think, as we saw during COVID, because they're capable of getting things catastrophically wrong. But the judgment of the people isn't always superior to the elites.
Sure. So the greatest argument against democracy is spending an average of 10 minutes with the average voter, I think.
Exactly.
Churchill said that.
I like to say that no one, commoner or elite, is well qualified to run your life. Only you are qualified to do that. So I don't want to give more power to the people relative to the elites, but I don't want to give more power to the elites either. I want to give more power to you.
There you go.
Run your own life.
There's broad agreement on that.
Okay,
right here at this table.
That sounds good. And Tim Walz has been emphasizing the personal freedom issues, which I love rhetorically, although I really don't appreciate how he obviously governed his state during COVID, where it did not accord with that. But yet we should all embrace more personal freedom, baby. That's my message.
Amen.
All right.
A good Monday morning message for sure.
Kevin's on board. Fantastic. Well, it was wonderful having you here. Really appreciate it. That does it for us today on Rising. Thanks so much for tuning in. And I will be back tomorrow. Be sure to like, share, and subscribe so you never miss any content. And for those of you who like to listen while on the go, now available anywhere you listen to podcasts. See you later.